Okay, we are going to go over the Live Paint Bucket tool. And the Live Paint Bucket tool is used to fill in shapes and illustrations. So I have an illustration here that's very basic. If we zoom in, you can see it's just open paths that have been drawn to create sort of a line-based image. And I'll go over how to fill in all the different areas of this image, kind of like what you would need to do for a magazine or a comic book. And then I'll also talk about some of the limitations of Live Paint Bucket and how you can create different layers that have different effects. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up our layers panel if yours isn't already open. And then we will change our panel options here, and I'm going to make mine a little bit larger so that you guys can see it better. Okay. And I have a locked layer here, which is just a JPEG, so that you guys could see what I did or how I got this drawing, but I just copied it from a JPEG. I just traced it. And then we have a layer, and my layer right now is labeled layer 2, but we're going to rename it fill. And then we're going to just duplicate this layer, and to duplicate we'll drag the layer down to this plus sign in the lower right corner of our windows. We'll get a fill copy, and I'll double click into that text to rename it outlines or stroke, whatever works best for you. To remember that one layer is going to contain all of the fill coloring and the other layer is going to contain all of the effects and strokes that outlines the image. Okay, so I will, now that I've created these and made sure they're in the same order, I will lock this stroke layer, and I'm also going to hide it by clicking on that eyeball. Nothing's going to change on your screen because these layers are currently duplicates, so they're exactly the same. And now we're going to get started with our paint bucket. So to start, I'm going to select the entire layer by clicking next to the meatball. And you can see all of the paths and anchor points showing that it's selected. And then I'm going to press K for the paint bucket. That's how I remember it. K for paint bucket. And the paint bucket tool should appear where your cursor is. And you can see most likely on your screen that it will say something like click to make a live paint group. Before I click, I am going to just show you something about the tool here. So in your toolbar, you can always double click on a tool to see all of the tools options. So under Live Paint Bucket, when I double click that, I can see my options for painting fills. I can also select paint strokes, but I'm not going to select that right now. Cursor swatch preview, which I find useful, but not everyone likes it. And then the highlight color and the weight. So for me, the highlight color is fine in red with 4 point, and I'll show you what that means. So what it means is once I create my paint group or live paint group, which I'm going to do right now by simply clicking on my selected group. Okay, so just to show you in the layers panel, now that I've clicked, now while nothing really has changed on screen, I now can expand that layer and see something called a live paint group. Okay, if I expand that, I'll see all of my original paths. Okay, we don't really need to look at that right now. Okay, so with those options that I just selected under the paint bucket, where it said highlight red 4 points, you can see what it means is as I hover over shapes, it will give me a highlight of that shape, indicating what's about to be filled in. Okay, notice as I move around this group, there are some areas that are not highlighting, for instance, his shirt. So we're going to walk through how to troubleshoot that so that you can fill in every shape that you're seeing on screen. Okay, now that I've built my my live paint group, I don't need to keep it selected. So I'm gonna, on my Mac, Command-Shift-A, on a PC it would be, I think, Control-Shift-A, or just deselect, okay? There's also a deselect here in your select menu. So deselect everything, it just makes it a little bit easier to use this tool. And then what I'll do is I'll open up my swatches so that I can view swatches as I use the paint bucket. Because the paint bucket is a swatch-based tool, you're coloring things in, I like to just pull my swatches tab out. You can just grab where the word swatches is in that tab, and you'll just pull that window out and be able to use it. Okay, my paint bucket is set to only fill in fills, F-I-L-L, and that's good. And then what I always want to make sure is set is the fill swatch in my toolbar is in the foreground. So occasionally, if you forget, you might have your stroke swatch in the foreground. And the problem with that is if you start choosing anything from your swatches or your color palette, that choice is going to be applied to the stroke. And we don't actually want that. We want to be working with fill. So to work with fills, you just click on that solid swatch to bring it forward. And then you can select whatever color you want to work with. So I'll just select a yellow. And you can see that the yellow swatch appears above my cursor here. And if I click, it's going to fill in the background. Okay, we'll deal with the shirt later, but let's color everything else in, and then we'll work on some of the customization to make sure that we've closed all of the what we call gaps in our paths. So under swatches, I've given you some different colors that you can use. Let's choose this dark gray for his hair. You can, of course, color this in with any of the colors that you like. Please don't feel obliged to duplicate what I'm doing exactly. It's just, these colors are just examples of what you could do. Okay, so I'll color in his eyes. Maybe you want a darker gray. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting using the swatches panel and clicking on the color I want, and then moving into my illustration and clicking on the shape that I want to fill in. Okay, and I'll just color, so I'm just clicking on each shape. If I want some shading, I might choose a darker tone here. Okay, for the mouth, I might choose something like this. Maybe there's a color that you're not finding here in your swatches. Remember that there are always swatch libraries that you can open up. And let's see, there's an interesting skin tone library. Okay, but there's also your color palette. So you can make really specific selections from your color palette, but just remember, if you don't save it to your swatches, it's really hard to find it again unless you use your eyedropper tool. So, but you can use your color palette. So just, you can click in this rainbow matrix down at the bottom to get started, and then you have your RGB sliders here. Depending on the type of file you opened, it may have CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But since I created this, it's RGB. So I'm just going to create a color tone for his tongue. It's kind of a funky sort of mauve color. And once I'm happy with it, I will click here to color it in. If I don't like that, I can always make adjustments and then do this. If I'm happy with this color, I can simply drag that swatch from my color swatch palette to my actual swatches palette, and it'll just save right there, and I can use it again. Okay, so it's always good to just think ahead if you make a new color that you're going to use. You know, make sure you save it so that you can use it again. Oops. Command Z or Control Z if you accidentally color something in that you didn't mean to. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to color in his pants and make him maybe a blue, but again, you can choose any colors you like. I love seeing my students' color palettes because you guys have way more sophisticated color palette than I do normally. And we'll also talk about what's going on in the hand here. So we have a kind of a picture frame around the edge of the image, and as it is, it looks like it's cutting through the fingers, but I will show you in a few minutes how to change that. And then I'll go in here. You might need to zoom in to make sure you're coloring in the right shapes. Let's see. There we go. That looks like it's got a little more depth. And let's choose a shirt color. Again, any color that you like is totally fine by me. And I'm just going to choose a darker shade for the lower half of the shirt and a lighter shade for the upper half. Go back to my yellow and make sure that the background is fully colored in. Okay. So overall, that's kind of a quick, oops, Command Z, or undo. Remember that you can also undo if you don't remember the shortcut keys yet. Edit menu allows you to undo. It also allows you to redo, paste, copy, cut. Okay, so don't forget that there are these menus at the top of your workspace that you can always work with. Okay, so we're pretty close to being done. Let me add an interesting color around the edge here. That looks pretty good. And now we're going to talk about what's going on with the shirt. So as we zoom in here, because I used a pencil tool to draw these open paths for this particular illustration, we do have some messiness. One, where these paths overlap, and two, where there are these gaps. So let's address the gaps first. And a gap is something like this, right? Where there's a space between where the path ends and another path begins. Okay, so that's a gap. You can fix gaps a number of ways. So one, you can press A on your keyboard. That will give you your direct selection tool. And the direct selection tool, you click on the anchor point one time to select it, and then drag over here, and that will simply close the gap so that when I press K and I access that paint bucket again, it will color it in. Okay, that's a better color. Okay, so that's one way to close the gap, is just manually doing that. I'm going to back up, Command Z a few times. The other way to close a gap is our selection tool. V is your shortcut key. Select this object, and then we'll navigate down to the Live Paint option in this object menu, and we're going to select Gap Options. So with Gap Options, you can turn on gap detection, and you can determine the size of the gap. So right now it says paint stops at small gaps, and actually it gives you a visual of what that small gap will look like. So what we need to do is change it to large gaps, and we can see the size of that gap. That looks pretty good. And once we're happy with that, we can say OK. And now again, we don't need to keep this selected, so I'm going to deselect everything. Remember, on a Mac, Command-Shift-A, I think that's Control-Shift-A on a PC, or just deselect from the select menu. And now if I use my paint bucket, it's going to fill in. Now, because we set it as large gaps, you can see what's happening. It's sort of spacing things out based on whether or not paths are a certain distance from one another, right? So like in here, because the hair and the edge of the shirt gets a little bit closer together, that creates a small space for the bucket tool. Okay, so once you're happy with the color, what we can do, and actually I'm not totally satisfied with how this looks. Yeah. Once we're happy with the colors, what we can do is we can now turn off the stroke on this layer. So just a reminder, I'm going to just open up this layers panel again. Remember the layers panel, the icon for that looks like two squares floating over one another. So I'll just take a look at my layers panel just to remind you that we are working on what we have labeled as the fill panel, or fill layer, okay? So we only want this layer to contain fill, and I'll show you why in just a minute, okay? So what we'll do is let's lock this layer. I'm sorry, let's not lock this layer. Let's select, my apologies, select V as your shortcut key for selecting. Select everything on this layer, which is your live paint group. And we're going to bring our stroke forward. And remember, your stroke swatch is at the bottom of your toolbar in the lower left corner. Click on that stroke swatch to bring it forward. That means all the stroke is currently about to be changed. And it's important that you have both the object selected and the stroke swatch forward. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn our stroke to none by clicking on this small icon in the lower right corner here. It's a white square with a red dash in it. Click on that, and now if I deselect, I will see that there's no longer any strokes. Every once in a while you'll also see like you missed a couple of little shapes, which I did here, so let's just clean those up really quickly. Not a problem. Oops. Not a problem to adjust these. Okay, just clean those up, make sure everything's done. Okay. Alright, so just take 1 minute to do that. Go back to your layers panel, and what we're going to do is we're going to lock the fill layer and hide it by clicking on the eyeball. And now we're going to reveal the outline layer. Remember, these need to be in order. So right now the top layer is outlines, the second layer is fill. Layer 3 is something called a template. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll make the outlines layer visible. We're going to unlock it by clicking where the lock was. And what we'll do is we're going to select everything in this layer by clicking next to the meatball. That will select all. And what we'll do is turn this group also into a paint bucket group. So K for your paint bucket tool, click into the group, okay? And what we'll do now that it's a paint group is we're going to deselect, okay? You can also deselect by going to your selection tool and just clicking outside of all paths. Okay, so I've deselected. And what we're going to do is we're going to work with stroke. Okay, now to make our lives a little bit easier, what I want to show you is if you select the entire live paint group, which you can do by clicking on it with the selection tool or clicking next to the meatball, you can turn off all fill. So I'm going to set the fill for this group to none. Oh, to none. And then I'll bring my stroke swatch forward. Okay. So now that we have this, I want to show you some of the options for the paint bucket when you're working with stroke. So I will double click on the paint bucket icon in your toolbar. That will give us our live paint options. Select paint stroke, deselect paint fill, say OK. And now what I'll do is I'm going to make sure nothing's selected. So right now, if I look on my screen, nothing on my artboard is selected. I want to make sure that my stroke swatch is forward. And I also want to make adjustments to my stroke settings in my toolbar at the top of my workspace. So I'm going to make my stroke 2 point. We'll keep it uniform for right now. And as I zoom in here, I have my black swatch selected. And if I click here, you can see what it's doing. So you can see what the live paint does for stroke. And I'll show you that if you double click here, it will apply the stroke settings, which for us is 4 point, black stroke. It'll apply it to all paths that touch the path you're clicking on. A triple click will apply it to all paths that are touching one another. So a triple click will do this. Notice how it applied it to all the paths in this group. Okay, so that's pretty cool and really fast. And of course, it doesn't have to be necessarily a black stroke. It could be a gray stroke, or oops, sorry. You always got to make sure that stroke is forward. That was a mistake on my part. You could do a white stroke. Okay. All right, but that's essentially what happens. Now, there are going to be some areas where maybe we want to hide the stroke. And so what we can do is, again, making sure that the stroke is forward and that nothing's selected, we can turn our stroke swatch to none. And we could even hide some of these messy strokes that we have in here, like around the frame, or even if we wanted to hide some of the strokes happening, let's say in the ear here, you can just zoom in and just show you that again. Zoom in, hover over the path, you see it highlighted, and you can click on it to make it none. So right now what's happening is my stroke swatch is forward, and I have the swatch for none, which is that white square with the red in it. That's none, and we can just, what we're doing is we're applying none to any path that we want to by clicking on it. Okay, so that, again, it's about kind of tidying up the illustration so that it looks better. And we can see that, oh, oops, my stroke jumped back after we went to none. My stroke jumped back to 0. So you always do have to double check that toolbar at the top of the workspace. And this is what your paint bucket tool could do. Okay, now to give you an idea, if I go back to my layers and make my fill visible, now I have the fill layer visible and the stroke layer, and you can see the stroke layer has all the strokes in it. okay? So doing this separately, you can also see I used the wrong colors in his hand, so I have to go fix that. But that gives you a good idea. Now, again, it was hard to see what it looks like if you apply a white stroke, but now I'll just select the group in my outline layer. Again, you can just click next to the meatball, and I'll set my color to white, make sure my stroke, I'm using 4-point just so you guys can see it better, but I'll use 4-point again for white, and I'm going to triple click, and just to give you an idea, it's kind of a funky look. That's what it looks like. So if I hide it, and again, so this is white stroke. Now, the other thing that you can do, I'm going to hide the fill by clicking on the eyeball here in layers and keep working on this outline. So the other thing that you can do, I'll deselect everything. Again, you can deselect, oops, let's just turn the none application to this little stroke here that I missed. Okay, that looks better. So the stroke is very limited as far as the paint bucket tool. You can only apply weight, uniform. You can't apply brush strokes. You can't apply profiles. If that's something you want to apply, then you're going to have to do it a different way. So again, I've made sure my fill layer is locked and it is hidden here, okay? And we are going to work on the outline layer just for a minute so I can show you some other options for controlling stroke, okay? So what I'll do is I'm going to go to my object menu, and well, I'll select my live paint object first, and then I'll go to my object menu, and I'm going to release this live paint, okay? What that does is it's no longer a live paint object. We're just going to go back to our original paths, okay? And when I deselect that, I can now see in my layer that we have all of our original paths. And I just wanted to show you how to control stroke without using the paint bucket. So the eyebrow is the easiest one here for us to take a look at. Obviously, it should be sort of hidden behind the hair, but we have to kind of fake that because the paint bucket is sort of like working on a flat two-dimensional space that doesn't really have foreground or background objects or layers. So what we'll do is we're going to cut this shape here so that it no longer has these segments that are visible. To do that, we're going to use, we're going to use our scissors tool, which is C for cut, and it's a little bit hard to see because my path is red, but if you hover over the path with your scissors and press C, it will cut it. You know which path it's cutting because that path will have this color on the inside that matches your layer color. So I have this red color on the inside of this path. So that is the path that I want to be cutting. So I'm just hovering over it and clicking to cut it. Okay, now visually nothing happens when you cut, because when you cut something, kind of like cutting a string, the length is still there, the object's still there, it just now has a cut. So there's now two endpoints where you clicked with the scissors tool. And scissors tool, if you wanted to find it in your toolbar, second column, it's in the same place as the eraser tool, but you need to hold your mouse down to get that menu. So once I've cut everything, I'm going to take my selection tool and click on this segment that I just created. Again, you know it's selected because you'll see the color appear running down the center of the path. I'm going to press delete on my keyboard, then click to select this other segment, delete on my keyboard, And to make some adjustments, you can use your direct selection tool. That's that white arrow. A is your shortcut key. And I'll just move these over using that direct selection tool. And it looks nice and clean. We can do that over here as well. So I'm pressing C for scissors, and I'm just trimming where I want to remove this path. And I can see this path is actually selected, so I'll just press delete. And again, A for direct selection, and you can just move this in. Now the nice thing about doing this instead of using your paint bucket tool is that you have total control over your paths. So once you get your paths all tidied up and removed, you can then apply other characteristics that we weren't able to apply with the paint bucket. So the paint bucket would only allow you to apply stroke weight and a uniform profile. Okay, and I'll just show you really quickly. Again, you can pause and just do this to clean this up. The other space that you'll want to clean up is this frame, so you'll want to delete these line segments as well. But just to show you is we can apply, now that we have our own paths, we can apply different profiles. So I'll just select these eyes, bring my stroke swatch forward, and I will use, now we were using stroke options up above in the toolbar when we had our bucket tool, but for us with the direct selection tool, we can open our stroke options using the properties panel on the right side. Just click on the word stroke, and you can apply a profile. Okay, so if you want a profile, you can change it, and I'll show you what a profile means. So by default, uniform. So that's what we have here, is just a 1-point uniform stroke, and it doesn't change. It doesn't have any variation as you move across the path. But if you choose a different profile, I'll change the weight so you can see this better. So profiles change as you move across the path. Okay, so you could apply different profiles or the same profile if you'd like. And because we've removed all those extra paths, they're gonna look, okay. So let's choose a 2-point, and then let's do a profile like this so it looks a little more like a ink drawing. And you can see what's happening is this particular profile starts thin, and as you move around the path it gets thicker, and then it gets thinner again, right? So here it's thin, thick, and then thin again, and that's what a profile does. Okay, so now that we've applied those profiles using our stroke panel, we can again make our fill visible, and we have a little bit of a more interesting illustration here, right? Because it looks a little bit more like it's drawn on, and you can keep adjusting this. So if you wanted a different profile, or let's say a different weight, you can make those adjustments. Okay, so that is all about paint bucket and fill.